He had a first-class seat, a CEO title, and a calm voice. So why did they act like he didn't exist? It began with silence. A black executive in first class, and a crew who treated him like he wasn't even there. No insults, no slurs, just skipped greetings, skipped menus, skipped service, until he finally asked, calmly, directly, "Did I do something wrong? Or did I just not look right?" One woman caught it all. And the moment she hit record, a quiet injustice turned into a national reckoning. If you believe the smallest moments can carry the loudest truths, like subscribe and drop your city in the comments. Andre Calloway had been awake since 4:00 a.m., long before the Milwaukee skyline blinked to life. His phone buzzed before the sun broke the horizon, the kind of start he was used to, structured, efficient, unbothered. He liked mornings like this, quiet, predictable. Early flights meant fewer distractions, and for someone like Andre, who had learned to cherish space that wasn't performative, that mattered. By 6:00 a.m., he was already seated in 3A, first-class window side, the kind of seat that made people glance twice before assuming who he was. He didn't care. He never did. Today's flight to Boston was the lead into a pivotal expansion proposal. Months of logistics modeling, executive projections, market testing. All of it culminated in a boardroom on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in the Seaport District. He wore a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, collar open. His tablet rested on the tray table in front of him, glowing with charts and quarterly reports. He scrolled slowly, one finger flicking data up the screen, the other hand cupping his chin in thought. He wasn't nervous, just thorough. The cabin was only half full, mostly business travelers. Some in pressed suits, some in joggers and AirPods, the usual spectrum of modern executive presence. There was a particular hush in first class at that hour, a collective understanding. Keep the voice low, the movements efficient. The aroma of recycled air and machine-warmed coffee filled the cabin. Familiar, forgettable. Then came the first moment. It was small, intentional. A blonde flight attendant in her early 40s passed by. Her stride was brisk, efficient, practiced. She greeted the man in 3C with a cheery, "Good morning, sir," nodding as she handed him a neatly folded newspaper. Then, without pause or glance, she passed Andre without a word. No greeting, no eye contact, not even a token smile. He didn't react, not outwardly. He simply tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they're taking mental notes. He wasn't new to this rhythm, he just hadn't heard this version in a while. Across the aisle in seat 2A, Judith Rowe looked up from her crossword. She was dressed in a brown cardigan and slacks, silver hair tucked into a loose bun. She looked like someone's quiet grandmother. What no one on that plane knew was that she had once served 20 years as a federal judge in Minnesota. She'd ruled on discrimination cases, labor disputes, class actions, and she'd seen enough in her lifetime to know when omission wasn't accidental. She noticed the greeting Andre didn't get, and she watched how he didn't react. Judith's pen hovered in midair as she followed the attendant's path, then slowly resumed writing. One clue down, another sort of clue forming in her mind. Andre returned to his screen, adjusting the brightness slightly. The numbers were solid. Performance was ahead of projections in 4 of 6 regional branches. Still, he anticipated pushback. There always was. His investors were smart but risk-averse. That's why he was flying in early. That's why he always flew in early. He liked being 2 steps ahead of the questions. Somewhere behind him, the cabin door sealed shut. Safety instructions played. Seatbelts clicked. The aircraft taxied. He leaned back, loosened his shoulders, and thought briefly of his daughter Leah. Her text from last night sat pinned to the top of his messages. "Dad, don't miss this one. I want you in the front row this time. The art show was next Thursday." He'd already rescheduled a vendor call and blocked the afternoon on his calendar. This time he wouldn't miss it. Outside the window, the runway blurred. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere shifted as the plane lifted from the ground, smooth, barely any turbulence. Andre exhaled once long and controlled. Then the second moment arrived. This time, it wasn't the same attendant. A younger male crew member moved down the aisle distributing menus. Row 1, 2A, 2C, 3C. He skipped 3A entirely. Andre blinked. Still nothing said. Still no expression. But somewhere across the aisle, Judith lowered her crossword. The aircraft leveled out at cruising altitude, and the subtle shift of pressure brought with it the routine cadence of in-flight service. Overhead lights dimmed. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. Somewhere behind him, a laptop snapped shut. In first class, the rhythm of hospitality was supposed to begin. Andre closed his tablet gently and placed it back in the seat pocket. He straightened slightly, not expectantly, just aware. It was the usual sequence: towels, menus, then breakfast. Another attendant passed this one carrying a stack of warm towels pinched between tongs. Row 1 received theirs, then 2A, 2C. She reached row 3 and once again moved directly past 3A. Her arm extended automatically to the passenger in 3C. Andre looked down at his empty tray table, then back up toward the aisle. Still nothing. Across from him, 2A received a towel with a kind smile and a "Here you go, Ms. Rowe." Judith Rowe nodded, murmured thanks, and cast a brief glance sideways. That's 3, she thought. 3 passes. 3 deliberate absences. Andre adjusted his cuffs slowly, not fidgeting, just moving with intention. His face revealed nothing, but his silence began to feel heavier. Less about patience, more about gathering evidence. A new voice approached. Male, upbeat, mid-30s. The third flight attendant. He held a small tablet in one hand and leaned toward the woman in 2A. "Omelet with mushrooms or smoked salmon croissant?" he asked brightly. Andre waited, still no eye contact. The attendant moved to 2C, made the same offer, then to 3C. Andre sat up slightly. "Excuse me," he said, tone calm. "I didn't get a menu." The attendant glanced down, caught off guard. His eyes flicked to the empty tray, then to Andre's face, then back to the cart. "Oh," he said, "we're actually out of meals." His tone wasn't apologetic. It wasn't rude either, just transactional, dismissive, a practiced deflection. Andre blinked once, then nodded toward the passenger next to him, 3C, who was unwrapping his salmon croissant. "But he's getting his," Andre said plainly. The attendant looked at the tray, paused. That was reserved. Then he moved on. Reserved. The word echoed in Andre's head as the cart rolled forward, clinking softly with ceramic and silver. He leaned back, gaze drifting toward the window, though he no longer saw the clouds. He'd been here before, not on this flight, not in this exact way, but in rooms where no one offered a seat, in meetings where assumptions preceded introductions, and conversations that stalled as soon as his title was spoken with surprise. And now, 30,000 feet in the air, it was happening again, this time with eggs and omission. In seat 2A, Judith sat still. Her phone now rested silently on her thigh, angled just enough to catch the aisle. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, but she had started recording. Not for proof, not for revenge, but because in that moment she realized if she didn't, no one would believe it happened. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was clinical, designed. Like the crew had been trained to avoid eye contact once a decision had been made. Once someone was deemed optional. Andre didn't sigh. He didn't call the button. He didn't ask for clarification. He just sat, composed, dismissed. 10 minutes passed. Andre hadn't moved. He'd leaned slightly into the window, watching nothing. The clouds were thin, the sky smooth, but his attention wasn't on the view. He wasn't thinking about Boston anymore. Not the meeting, not the expansion proposal, not even the performance forecasts glowing on the screen he'd just put away. He was thinking about silence. How practiced it had to be, how sharp it could feel, and how absurdly familiar it had become. A soft voice interrupted the quiet again. The third attendant, the younger one, clean-shaven, polite, was now walking the aisle, checking trays, collecting cups. His pace slowed when he reached 3A. He stopped. "Sir," he said, puzzled, "did you not receive a meal?" Andre looked up at him, face unreadable. "I was told you were out." The man blinked. "That's strange. Let me check the galley." He turned, walked quickly toward the front. Andre didn't look after him. He just sat back again, exhaled once through his nose, and kept his gaze forward. Across the aisle, Judith Rowe hadn't moved either. Her phone was still angled from her lap lens, discreetly aimed forward. She didn't shift. She didn't raise it. She just let it roll, calm, quiet, unshakable. She had learned through decades on the bench that silence could be just as damning as shouting, and that what made people most uncomfortable wasn't confrontation. It was truth captured in stillness. Moments later, the young attendant returned. He held a tray, sealed, warm, neatly plated. "We had 3 extras," he said, placing it down gently. "I'm really sorry, sir. Not sure how that happened." Andre nodded once. "Appreciate it." He didn't touch the tray. The attendant hesitated, as if unsure whether to say more, then moved on. The meal sat between them, untouched, unasked for, undeserved in its lateness. Judith leaned forward slightly, her voice low. It was the first time she spoke. "May I ask something?" she said. Andre turned toward her. His eyes were calm, clear. Would this have gone the same way, she asked, if you looked different? Andre didn't answer right away. He exhaled a slow breath that carried years inside it. Maybe decades. I've asked myself that more times than I can count, he replied. Their eyes met for only a second, but in that second something passed between them. Understanding not built on assumptions, but on experience. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of patterns, full of memory, full of the quiet calculations people make when they're trying to decide whether to speak or survive. In the row behind them, a man scrolled his phone, chuckling at a podcast. A woman removed her headphones to ask for more orange juice. The world kept moving business as usual. But in row 3A, something had already broken. And in 2A, someone had caught it. 3 minutes and 17 seconds. That's how long the camera had been rolling. Long enough to witness omission. Long enough to hear the tone in a flight attendant's voice shift when answering a simple question. Long enough to document the expression of a man who knew this wasn't a mistake. Just a routine. The flight landed at Boston Logan just after 8:20 a.m. Andre Calloway remained seated as the other first-class passengers began to gather their coats and briefcases. Some reached for phones, others loosened ties. The mood was brisk, professional, disconnected, as if the flight were just another efficient transition between cities and meetings. To most of them, it had been exactly that, but not for everyone. Andre sat with his back straight, hands folded in his lap. He wasn't sulking. He wasn't frozen. He was just still. His tray remained down the meal untouched. The foil on the omelet tray was no longer warm. It hadn't been for at least 45 minutes. Across the aisle, Judith Rowe tucked her phone into the side pocket of her carry-on. She hadn't decided what to do with it yet, but she knew one thing for certain: if she hadn't recorded it, it wouldn't have existed. Not really. Not beyond Andre's own memory. And memories could be explained away, dismissed, debated. Video spoke differently. As the cabin door opened and passengers began to shuffle off the plane, Judith followed slowly, nodding a soft goodbye to Andre. "Don't let this slide," she said. He paused, met her eyes. "I won't." They walked off in opposite directions. Andre toward the charging station near gate B27, Judith toward the escalator. The morning bustle of the terminal didn't feel different, but something in both of them had shifted. 15 minutes later, Andre sat at a quiet corner table with an outlet nearby, opened his laptop, and filed a complaint through the airline's online portal. It was calm, precise, professional. Flight 2237, departure MKE, arrival BOS, incident failure to provide service. Names of crew partial but clear enough. He didn't use the word bias. He didn't mention race. He didn't need to. Not yet. He hit submit and closed the tab. To him, it was just one more entry in a long file of quiet incidents he'd archived over a lifetime. He was used to it. Judith wasn't. She sat on a bench near baggage claim, sipping from a steel travel mug. Her daughter was coming to pick her up. She had no meetings, no press, no responsibilities that day, except for one thing tugging at her conscience. The video still sat on her phone. 3 minutes, 17 seconds. She trimmed it, removing the beginning and the end, and stared at the caption box. She hesitated, then typed, "I don't usually post things like this, but what I witnessed on Flight 2237 this morning left a knot in my chest. A black man in first class was repeatedly passed over during service. When he asked why, he was told they were out of meals while the man next to him was served. I filmed it. Watch for yourself." She posted it. By the time her Uber pulled up in front of her daughter's house in Cambridge, the video had been viewed over 900 times. By the time she took off her coat, it had passed 5,000. By 11:30 a.m., the number hit 20,000. And by noon, a national news outlet had picked it up. They didn't call her first. They didn't ask for permission. They just ran the story with a still from the video. Andre's face blurred. And the headline, "Airline crew allegedly skips black first-class passenger during service." The word allegedly made her wince. She had the proof. She'd lived it. What more did they need? Meanwhile, Andre stood in the glass conference room of a sleek Boston tower leading a strategic presentation. The boardroom was filled with executives who had no idea how his morning had begun. He spoke clearly. He answered every question. He adjusted slides with practiced confidence. When his assistant leaned in and whispered, "You're going viral on Twitter," he blinked. Once. Then went on speaking. Later in the restroom, he watched the clip with the sound off. No expression on his face. just eyes that stayed fixed on the screen, not with surprise, with recognition. He didn't share it. He didn't comment. He simply locked his phone and returned to the room. But by that point, the world was already speaking for him. At 3:12 p.m., the airline released a holding statement. We are aware of a video involving Flight 2237 and are actively investigating the matter. We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind and are committed to treating every passenger with dignity and respect. The comments flooded in instantly. You don't tolerate it. Looks like you trained it. This isn't just about one crew. This is about a culture. Where's the apology? By sunset, multiple former flight attendants had anonymously posted their own stories online. Claims of whispered instructions, quiet hierarchies, and unspoken expectations for who should be prioritized in first class. Andre didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence was speaking for him now, and this time people were finally listening. By 2:45 p.m., the story had already leapt beyond social media. Local Boston affiliates ran the clip during their midday news segment. A cropped still of Andre's face appeared on the bottom corner of the screen, the video muted but unmistakable. Viewers watched as a flight attendant breezed past him, tray in hand, then turned with a forced smile toward the white passenger beside him. The segment was only 90 seconds long, but it hit a nerve. In a conference room overlooking the harbor, Andre Calloway didn't check his phone. He finished the second half of his pitch, answered questions, adjusted a map of proposed warehouse realignment, and wrapped up as if nothing had happened. Not a single executive in the room asked about the clip. Not yet. Outside, though, the world was catching fire. That same hour, a woman who had been seated in row 5 of the same flight quote tweeted Judith's post. I saw what happened. I didn't speak up. Watching this now makes me sick. Her words changed everything. Up until then, it had been easy for skeptics to call it a misunderstanding or an overreaction. But now there was another witness. And she wasn't defending herself. She was admitting she failed. The comment section shifted tone. Less outrage, more reckoning. More people joined in. This happened to my father in a hotel lobby. My mom got skipped in business class 3 times before someone said anything. I used to work ground crew. First class had a look. If you didn't fit, you got silence. At 4:10 p.m., Judith received a message from a producer at a major network. They wanted to fly her to New York for a live interview. She declined. She wasn't looking for airtime. She just wanted people to stop pretending subtle bias didn't exist. By early evening, Carmen Steele, the airline's head of communications, was pacing in a war room at company headquarters. Her phone vibrated non-stop, press legal internal. She glanced at a junior staffer who had just pulled up the Reddit thread now trending under Now Seat 3A. 3 former employees posting anonymously had written, "First-class attendants were trained to set the tone. Translation: make regulars feel prioritized. That often meant ignoring passengers who looked new." Carmen didn't swear. She didn't sigh. She just wrote 3 words on her whiteboard: full crew removal. That evening at 6:47 p.m., the airline issued a second statement. Following our internal review, we have removed the crew of Flight 2237 from active duty. We regret the experience one of our passengers endured and have contacted them directly to apologize. No names, no direct ownership, still controlled, still clinical. But something was different now, because the story no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the people who saw it, and more importantly to those who didn't, but recognized it anyway. Back in Minneapolis, Andre's phone buzzed quietly on his hotel nightstand. He hadn't posted a single thing, but his inbox was filled with hundreds of messages, some from colleagues, others from strangers. Most said the same thing. You handled it with grace. Andre didn't feel graceful. He felt exhausted. He hadn't spoken, hadn't recorded anyone, hadn't even asked for an apology. He had simply asked a question. Why was I skipped? And somehow that had been enough to start a national conversation. Judith sat in her daughter's kitchen sipping chamomile tea while her granddaughter painted quietly at the dining table. Her phone lit up every few minutes. Interview requests, press inquiries, old friends from law school. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Rochelle. They'd clerked together decades ago. You didn't just see it, you made the rest of us see it too. Judith didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her job was never to make a statement, only to make the truth undeniable. 2 days later, Andre Calloway stood behind a podium in the Grandview Conference Center in downtown Cincinnati. The room was filled with over 200 executives from across the logistics and transportation industries. People who had come expecting a talk about global freight strategy. His keynote had been scheduled months in advance. The event brochure still read Andre Calloway, CEO, Summit Freight Holdings, innovating through infrastructure. But everyone in that ballroom had already seen the clip. Even those who hadn't shared it had watched it. And now they were waiting, not for insights on shipping lanes, but for a response to 3 minutes of quiet injustice. Andre looked out over the crowd. He adjusted the mic once, took a breath, and spoke. "I'm going to take a detour from my prepared remarks," he said, voice low but firm. "We'll get to freight strategy in a bit." A few chuckles rippled across the room. Most people stayed silent. I've been asked by reporters, colleagues, strangers online, what happened on that flight, what it meant, how I felt. And I guess the expectation is that I should say something now, that I should speak on it. He paused. Well, here's the truth. I wasn't surprised. That sentence hung in the air like a challenge. I wish I could say I was. But anyone who's ever had to keep proving they belong in rooms they've already earned knows exactly what I'm talking about. No one reached for their phones. No one stirred coffee. I didn't yell. I didn't record. I didn't ask for anything more than what was already mine. A seat, a menu, a meal. And when I was skipped, I asked why. He shifted slightly, placing both hands on the podium. That's all I did. I asked a question, and someone else answered it. Not with words, but with action. She saw something. She didn't ignore it. And that made all the difference. A few heads turned toward Judith Rowe, who sat quietly in the fourth row, invited by the event organizers after the clip went viral. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just listened. Andre continued, "You want to know why that video resonated? Why people are still talking about it? It's not just about race, or travel, or customer service. It's about dignity." His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. It's about the line that separates being seen from being dismissed, and how thin that line is, and how often it moves, depending on who's watching. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the aisle dabbed her eyes discreetly. "I've been in rooms like this for most of my career," Andre said. Rooms filled with influence, strategy, innovation. But the hardest thing to manage has never been supply chains. It's been silence, the kind that creeps in when people pretend nothing happened. He looked down briefly, then back up. We're taught to be polite, to keep moving, to not make things awkward. But maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe silence has protected too many patterns for too long. He let the pause settle, then leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to cancel anyone. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm not interested in a trending headline." He pointed gently, almost absent-mindedly, toward his chest. "I want people to pay attention. Not to me, but to the moment." Another pause. This one intentional, because that moment happens every day, in offices, in airports, in boardrooms, and most of the time, no one's filming. A low murmur passed through the room, like the soft wave of a shared memory. Andre stepped back from the mic. "So no, I didn't go viral. The truth did, and maybe that's what we need more of." The room didn't applaud right away. It sat with the words, not because the speech was dramatic, but because it was real, and real has a gravity that clapping can't always match. Then someone started, just one, then another. Soon a steady wave of applause filled the room, not explosive, not performative, just honest, earned. Judith Rowe didn't clap. She didn't need to. She already knew. 3 weeks passed. The internet had moved on. New outrage, new trends, new clips to dissect. But for some, the moment on Flight 2237 hadn't faded. It lingered not as a headline, but as a quiet shift in how they looked at things. In his Minneapolis office, Andre Calloway sat at his desk, catching up on operations reports. His team was planning a warehouse automation rollout, and his inbox hadn't seen mercy in days. He barely looked up when his assistant buzzed in. "There's a visitor here to see you. Says her name is Judith Rowe." Andre blinked. He stood slowly. "Send her in." The door opened and Judith stepped in wearing a charcoal gray wool coat and a thin smile. She carried no purse, no phone, no fanfare, just presence. Measured and composed the same way she'd looked on the plane in that seat across the aisle. "You didn't have to come all this way," Andre said, offering his hand. "I was visiting my granddaughter in St. Paul," she replied. "Figured I owed you a face-to-face. You don't owe me anything." "No," she said, taking a seat. "Maybe not. But I wanted to see where you work. Meet the man behind the silence." Andre sat down opposite her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was spacious. She looked around his office. Minimalist. Ordered. A few family photos, a framed quote on the wall that read, "Consistency is louder than charisma." Judith nodded toward the quote. Fitting. Andre smiled. My daughter picked that one out. Judith smiled faintly. Leah, right? The one with the art show. He raised an eyebrow. You remember that I remember everything she said, then paused. Do you regret not saying more that day? He didn't answer immediately. Then I think silence has its own language. People assume if you don't react, you're unaffected. But silence can be louder than shouting, especially when people are finally listening. She studied him for a second, then said, My husband would have liked you. He used to say dignity is the last thing they can't take from you, unless you hand it over. Andre's smile deepened. Sounds like something my mother would have said. They sat for another quiet stretch, not rushing it. She asked about Leah's art show. He said she sold her first piece. He asked what it was like to sit on the federal bench for 20 years. She said it made her believe change was possible, but not fast. Then she stood smoothing her coat. I didn't record that video because I thought it would make a difference, she said, reaching for the door. Andre looked at her. She continued, I recorded it because I didn't want to pretend I hadn't seen it. That to me was the real choice. He nodded, stood with her. That made all the difference. She offered a final nod, turned and left. That evening, the city was quiet beneath a pale winter sky. Andre stayed late in his office long after the hum of daytime calls and footsteps had faded. He sat alone, tablet open, a blank document glowing in the dark. He thought for a moment, then typed, Every day we're given a choice. Look away or pay attention. Speak or stay silent. And sometimes the loudest truths are the ones no one expected to catch on camera. He paused, then added, Respect is not a favor. It's a starting point. He saved the file, closed the tablet, and sat back staring at the quiet skyline. He hadn't planned for any of this. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes the stories we never choose end up changing us the most, not because of how loudly they're told, but because of how clearly they're seen. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that make us pause, reflect, and look closer. This story shows that silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means exclusion. And while quiet dignity may not demand attention, it often deserves it more than anything else. It reminds us that unconscious bias still operates. Not in shouts, but in skipped steps, withheld glances, and brushed-over moments. And it happens everywhere. On planes, in offices, in classrooms, even in everyday service interactions. By practicing awareness, respect, and humility, we move one step closer to a society that doesn't just claim to see everyone, but actually does.